Hi, guys. Welcome to the Lit Mag Lab podcast. This is Vevna Forrow. Yeah, let's get started. Okay, guys. So previously I was talking about, a case that we came across, in terms of plagiarism, just an example. Again, to reiterate that, no system is perfect, for plagiarism checking, but a lot of Lit Mag journals and, founding editors and the editorial team does the best they can to catch those things or to address it, So I was just covering, what basically some editors do when they identify, a poem has been plagiarized, what they typically do. Obviously, right, take it down, pull it out of, the issues, or, if it's solely online, right, they have to, usually have some sort of a message about it. Some do, or some pull it down and just remove it immediately, So, listen back to that, but that's basically a little summary of it. And, so for this episode, I think this is going to be the last audio-based episode, and then maybe I'll share my screen with you guys on some other things in the Lit Mag community, and maybe even share some sample issues and stuff like that for fun, So just sharing thoughts and things that, in the Lit Mag world and community, I think it helps to share. So a while back, you may see the question of the day here. So, a while back I had, a Dippity tip series, right? Part of Dippity Lit Mag, and some enjoyed that, but I want to turn it into an episode here too on the podcast. And I don't think I'll retype out. We'll see. I might, I don't think I'll do a new article on that, but I basically, I think it was back in January 5th, 2024 here, where I sent out 15 ways to market your poetry collections and art in the 21st century. So, the question here, so, how do you market your work as a writer or poet, or even an artist, right, in today's, world, overall? Some lit mags and journals, right, they do additional promotion and share on social media channels and stuff like that. But some places, they just publish, your work, and they don't really do anything besides that. They're just yep, it's done, and they don't do anything further. So, some things, I'll cover this, as I go further down. But yeah, so I'm just going to go over, those 15 ways here. Not everyone's read that article, so I think it's beneficial, right, to share it on this podcast. I think, a lot of writers struggle with marketing, and it can be really expensive and costly. You can lose a lot of money, again, there's a lot of scams, there's a lot of, things out there in the world of, marketing your poetry collections and things, that have been published and work, right? Whether it be self-published or not, marketing is, it's hard, to get more eyes on your work, if you're really looking to generate sales or additional side income, from your publications or work, or if you want to, turn it into become a full-time writer or artist, right? So there are several routes you can take to, do that, I'm not a best-selling author. I'm not, anything like that, or, I've never written a New York Times bestseller, and I'm not trying to. So, I think we all, we feel good, right, when our series do well, though, obviously, right, or when something we create, is picked up by someone, anytime we get even just one book sale, it's accomplishment alone, that someone took the time to purchase or work to read it, at least, and, it's, yeah. Anyways, let's dive in here. So the first thing I ever did, as a poet, a writer. So, I created, this ebook series. It's just all rhymesy for fun. I'd had this rhyme phase for a while. The first few years I eased back into poetry again, a couple years back, I think in 2021, a little bit before then, or, and yeah, so it was, the Jazzy Hummingbird project, I created my own little ad for it, like a bookcase shelf ad. And then what some lit magazine journals do, right, they rent out, or they don't rent out, but they allow writers to reserve ad space for a small fee. Like sometimes it's $50. In other cases, it can be much higher, like through Poets and Writers, or, I know it can be, sometimes some of the larger, magazines or that go out, to people, right, and the community, or, have a large following, right? It can cost, from like $200 to $500 sometimes for a small square, online even, and then like full page color ads even can be $1,000 to $2,000, and some in-page advertisements are a couple $100 for sure. I've seen that. So I didn't see a lot of success with in-print ads. I think looking back, I would have done more so online ads. There are quite a few literary magazines and journals that let you put up an ad on their website, and there's traffic, right? They do have monthly site traffic. So I think that's pretty neat, and it's some online ads, they're very budget friendly and cost friendly, ways to find those, I ended up doing a lot of keyword searching just back then. I remember, I can't give you an exact list of names of places that do that today, but I mentioned Poets and Writers. They have, in-print ads. They're pretty pricey, though. Carve Magazine, I did an ad with them in one of their issues, and I think it was like under $100 or something, if I recall. It's fairly reasonable, maybe it was $50 to $75. I don't remember exactly, but I just know it was, within my budget, so that was good. Yeah, but I didn't see a lot of any sales generate from that, actually, so it was more of a loss, but still pretty cool. I think Carve Magazine is very cool, and that's CARVE. And then, so if you type like literary magazine or lit mag, online advertisement or in-print ads, keyword searching, you'll come across some in the search results if you scan very carefully. And there's a lot of places that do that. Lit magazine journals have advertisement sections and openings, oftentimes when they have issue calls open, throughout, their windows too. Sometimes you'll come across that, and have calls for that too. So you can be on the lookout for that. And usually there's a small fee associated with that. But yeah, if you're going to go with Poets and Writers or even poets.org, they have, things where you can have like advertisements in newsletters, advertising in, their website and page, and it can be, several $100s typically or more. Some ads again are in the, $1,000, $2,000 range totally. And sometimes they do have some discounts throughout the year on some advertisements, for some of those sites, but it's still pretty high. So yeah, I think again, looking back, I would have done more online ads and see the results there. I don't have a lot of experience with doing online ads with lit magazine journals, but I think that would have been less expensive than the in-print ad ones, But yeah, everyone sees mixed results with in-print ads, I think. It really depends on, again, probably the circulation of that magazine and things like that, and, other things, So a number of factors there. But yeah. Second way I have listed here from back in January. So I mentioned independent author groups and networks. So I joined, the Independent Author Network. It looks like IAN, abbreviated IAN. So I was in their basic support membership plan, their directory plan, and I think it was the bronze plan. I can't really recall, but basically what they do, they create a page on their site, with your books and links to each one. They have like silver, gold, and platinum plans, and they can include, social media links, and they have, they promote you through their social media, Twitter and all their channels, right? So other groups and networks like this, exist for self-published authors. I didn't see like an increase in book traffic or sales at that time, but still it was a good learning experience for me. And, they were totally legit. They created the page, and a lot of authors self-published or through them, in terms of using their space for, others to find them through there. And I think it helps with, when someone looks up, your pen name or author name, right? It helps with like helping others find you, in the search results and things like that, right? It creates an entry in there. So I think that was pretty cool. The Independent Author Network, they've been around since 2010, I believe. And yeah, so I still have a profile with them. And, I think they have some other like book awards contests and, fiction directory, author directory. Yeah. So, yeah, so it's like abbreviated IAN, the Independent Author Network. So that was interesting. Back then, when I was starting writing poetry, creating collections again, I was like, I want to try things I've never done before in the marketing space. I just want to try. I had a budget set aside for this to experiment with, and obviously, with marketing, usually it's like a miss or hit or miss. Sometimes we take a loss. Sometimes with marketing, or sometimes we succeed with it, right? So you have to be, I just wanted to try and see what the results were, because I was always curious. I always saw all these various marketing routes, and it's like, I want to try these things. We only live once, right? So might as well try these marketing, various avenues to market, work and things like that, right? And things I've never done before. It was scary. I was like, especially when you are dealing with, marketing and money, and things like that. It's you don't want to lose that money, but it's bound to happen, sometimes, So yeah, social media advertising is the third one, by the way. So, I've tried for sure, like many poets, writers, even lit magazine journals do this. They do, advertisements on social media, right? There's those whole like boost reels, boost post stuff. I've totally tried that just because I was curious, and I've seen mixed results of that stuff. Recently, I'll share, guys, like on Instagram with the whole algorithm changes, looking back, several years ago when I started on, Instagram sharing my art and other things, right? There, it was a completely different, I feel like, atmosphere and stuff. Now the algorithm shifted, and like, for some reason, like 9 times out of 10, whenever I post something from, like, let's say it's from the Notes app or something, and type something out, it has to be something call to action, right? Or something for others to read, right? Obviously you can't just have like, anything, but, like typically 9 times out of 10 on something that I've typed out on my Notes app, that goes out to, on a black screen, right? The Notes app, it goes out to a majority of those who follow, our accounts. I don't know why. I don't really get what the algorithm, how that reaches more versus than some of the other, reels or designs or content, right? That we've tried to share that, took much longer to create than just like typing something for a few seconds out on a Notes app, right? It's kind of bizarre. And, it does, song choice comes in a factor, right? Things like that, location, those fields and things like that when you're, posting, obviously, whether it be Instagram or TikTok and things like that. Anyways, I tried, Instagram and Twitter, X ads myself, different spans of time, I saw increased engagement and saw some things like that. But I stopped using, ads around 2022. And then I tried, once or so, sometimes for sharing issues and things like that a little bit further, just a very small budget, $5, under $20, nothing too extensive. I know some artists, musicians, they spend a lot of money, on advertising, hundreds of thousands of dollars even. I heard about an artist spending several $1,000s, a month on advertising their music to boost, listeners and things like that. And it doesn't always necessarily work, right? And you can be out of a lot of money, it's tough, so the IG algorithm, it's tough, it's very difficult to understand and grasp, it's fluctuated quite a bit, over time. And it's made it, I think, harder on a lot of artists. And others have come up with like various hooks and attention grabbers, right, to lead up to their content. Sometimes it's completely unrelated, I see, and then it leads into their video or different things. So it's very tough. to market your work as an artist or writer in today's, social media space. And you don't necessarily need social media to market your work, right? Something that, Dippy Lit Mag, right? And what, actually, I should say, there's Facebook ads too, YouTube ads. I haven't really dabbled a whole lot in those though, but I've heard others have, pretty not bad results with Facebook ads, and there's Google AdSense and other stuff, right? But I haven't yet really used that a bunch. I've tried Facebook ads a little bit, I think, in the past, but not an extensive period. I cut it short, so I never got to see the results from that. But yeah. Anyways, back to podcasting. So yeah, doing a podcast like I do, right, can be a way to share your work and stuff like that. The thing about podcasting, right, you have to be consistent, right? You can't just, do a couple episodes here and there and say, and then you have to have like a consistent release schedule or have your episodes go out. Like you have to, keep going, right? So some authors, create podcast shows around their content or their work or messages and focuses they do, and things like that, right? So you can either create your own podcast, or you can, a lot of shows have like in the descriptions ways to contact them or to become guests, or sometimes you can reach out to them on social media and say, hey, I'm interested in, maybe partaking your podcast, you can't be scared to reach out or things like that. I think that's what I, as I got back into the poetry community and things like that, and started writing again. And, I really, for developing Hummingbird Blink, it was, about, and Dippy Lit Mag too, you can't be afraid to, reach out to others, even like you're trying to get into bookstores and stuff like that, making connections and, communicating with others, you can't be afraid to do so. But yeah, so you don't necessarily have to do a video-based podcasting or anything like that. You can try, what works for you. You can do a mix of audio and video episodes. You can do a solely audio-only podcast. You can do, whatever you feel comfortable with. How do you make a podcast? Well, prior to, what we know today is Spotify for podcasters, right? There was Anchor. I really miss Anchor. Honestly, I feel like the main benefit of Anchor was like, you could do everything within the app without having to go off to like another separate app for editing and, everything, right? And, yeah. So when there was Anchor, right, you could do all of your trimming, audio editing within the app. You could also have this like cool little guest invite link where others could record their voice up to a minute. And that's how we did some invite guest reads too in our inbox back then. I missed that. Anchor was pretty neat. I got used to it. It was very easy to arrange the order of everything, sections and stuff like that. I was really bummed out when they discontinued Anchor and, they updated the app and said, oh, it's Spotify for podcasters now. Now I've tried other podcast platforms and stuff like that. There are some free ones out there. I don't remember. Did I try Podbean or something? It was one that had Bean in the name. But just know I've tried some other free ones, and I think the best one, is Spotify for Podcaster. There are some paid ones you can do, monthly fees and stuff like that. But usually when you stop paying the fees and stuff like that on some of these services, right, they take your episodes down or they discontinue, the distribution of it to the library, right, or the podcast. And, you can easily link up, let's say you start a podcast, right? You can easily link up, your RSS feed, right, for it to go across different channels. And I'm not really sure how, I've seen my this podcast show, other podcast shows end up in other, podcast places and stuff like that. I'm not really sure how that all works, since I didn't, link up the feed over there. But maybe there's ways for others to do that for shows that they listen to. I don't know. But yeah, anyways, yeah. So, for podcasts, you have to really hit a certain listener amount to be able to monetize it or do subscriptions, monthly listeners or X amount. in the back end of, Spotify for podcasters, or Spotify for creators, I should say. It says, like, I think, the Spotify partner program, you need to, hit 2,000 people streamed on Spotify in the last 30 days, hit 10,000 consumption hours on Spotify in the last 30 days, and publish at least 12 episodes. And then the subscription way, the second way, subscriptions, right? You have to hit 100 people streamed on Spotify and publish at least 2 episodes. And I think they changed this in the past a little bit too. So that's just as of, July 2025. But so I've never been able to, monotonize my podcast or things like that. I tried briefly with the first ever show I did, right? Hummingbird Blink, but then I was like, I don't want to put ads. They had a feature to include ads in the podcast, but I was like, that's really disruptive for like those who want to just listen to poetry and others, right? So I think ads are messed up, for things like that. For those types of podcasts where you just want to hear, nothing but, the poet's voice and not all these other things and ads. Ads are really disruptive, so I don't like that. Yeah, so I haven't, monotonized any of my podcast shows or anything to date, even though, there's several. I've done probably somewhere between, 200 something podcast episodes across the shows I've done, between, so, we, didn't have a consistent release schedule per se. I just do the episodes when I can too. So that's okay, I tried to, do an episode as much as possible, across shows and stuff I've done in the past. But, so who knows, maybe one day, this podcast or another podcast will, gain traction, but I don't know. I didn't really start this to monotonize. I just wanted to, do knowledge exchange, and share my thoughts and talk about different things in the community. So, if I were to ever, monotonize something, I would put it back towards Dippity Lit Mag or, trying to, pay poets for the work or other things, right? Trying to raise funds and stuff. But it's tough, We do what we can, with the things like that. Even Instagram and some other social media platforms, right? They have a certain amount you need to reach, before you're able to, apply for those partner program stuff, I'm sure you all know the YouTube, monotonization thing and all of the, you have to meet certain requirements and stuff. But, I don't know if I'll ever do stuff like that, but we'll see, But anyways, so you can start your own podcast and things like that. So another thing is linkage, right? So number 5, linkage. On Instagram, social media platforms, you want to have a good link in bio. I tried, several various link in bio systems, over the years. Linktree obviously is the most common one everyone uses. I think it's pretty popular. They also bought out Koji, which is one I really loved. That was like my favorite one ever, and I was really sad that they, were taken over by Linktree. They're so KOJI no longer exists. I know some just drop a direct link to their Amazon author page or Barnes & Noble or where their book is or their own website. Now, the thing about, links, if you're using like a link in bio, right, it's directing traffic to those links, not necessarily a single site or page. What I've done, and what some places do, they create their own landing page or their own link in bio type setup, with buttons, right, and directing them to their website. Then you are driving traffic to your own page and website, right, which is better versus a link tree sometimes. But no doubt, a lot of the Linktree, link in bio systems today are very cool. I really love the ones where you can include like YouTube videos or song links in there. I think that's, and, songs and stuff. I think that's really fun. I tried Hop, bio links for Dippity. I mean, I still have, an account with Hop and some, so I don't know if I'll go back to using that or a bio platform again. I've sometimes tried alternating and seeing, different results but at the end it drives traffic away from, your website. So look that up. Other YouTubers and others have, gone over that, why you shouldn't use link in bios. But occasionally I've done it for just like my personal projects and stuff, like just an organized tree, because, separate from, some other things like Dippity and stuff. But yeah, for like having, your poetry publications in a link tree or something like that. Most recently, I've tried BioSite, which is through Squarespace, and it's pretty neat, I think. I like the BioSite. That's the most recent one I've tried, for link in bio. So, yeah. And then number 6, so collabs. So a lot of poets I know in the community have done, spoken word collabs, calligraphy style collabs, and they've even, tag team poems and created poems together, to market each other's work, and I think that's cool. Or they've done, a few other things, just like, there are, some accounts that focus nothing on promotion, on social media and stuff like that. And I think you have to be careful, there's some cases, poets and myself have run into that, you let's say you cough up some money for their promotional services, right? And, they post it out there and it gets little to no traction, right? Let's say because of the algorithm or something, they may have 30,000 followers, 100,000, but, how many really, purchased it or bought it, right? And oftentimes I saw, barely anyone, so I didn't really see a lot of results from things like that, promotional accounts and stuff. But I know some poets they worked with some promo accounts, and some of them are legit and some of them are scams. So you have to be really careful about things like that. I really wouldn't do that anymore or anything. I didn't really see a lot of benefits from that, yeah. So I think, do everything yourself, it's hard, there's so many con artists and stuff and scams on social media. So you want to be very careful about, things like that. But no doubt there are some great accounts out there who do a good job of doing features of poets and, promotional work around them and stuff like that. And some of them don't have fees involved and some of them do. So you just want to be, very careful about that, right? Yeah, it can be dangerous out there. So yeah, that's not one I would really recommend, a bunch. Number 7 is word of mouth and networking, so I think this still works today. Hummingbird Blink was a lot of word of mouth, and things like that. Word of mouth marketing, it's not necessarily overnight success, and sometimes it's a very slow and gradual, So I know, I won't repeat names again, but I know, again, countless authors and creators who had their work, rejected at different points of their life. I myself have been rejected by a few book publishers. And again, I decided to self-publish every scrap of writing I had, even all of the supposedly flops or failures, or things that didn't make sense, But no doubt, again, some poems and things I've written, no doubt, I was really proud of, but some of it just for fun. Again, it doesn't necessarily, not everyone's going to like your work again that's out there. So it's really, yeah. But networking can really help, in the poetry community. I've seen some really cool, support, in the community, friends, doing cross posting, those joint posts and things like that. And that can help, because the algorithm is kind of messed up sometimes. So when you're joining a post, right, you get that, their followers see it, your followers, or not all of them, but, sometimes it depends on the algorithm. But yeah, so that's pretty nice, not just organic word of mouth, and that can happen, through, others stumbling across your work and then sharing oh, guys, check this out. Then their friends, they recommend it. And, it's a chain, right, of recommendations. And number 8, so mobile app creation. So again, I mentioned one of my first ever majors was mobile app development and programming, briefly in community college. And if I could afford to, I would build my own, app around my poetry, my, work and everything. I tried a prompt-based app or, something I had in mind, and things like that, and a few other things. Initially, I was almost going to UW Stout, for packaging engineering design. But, I ended up going to community college mobile app development program because of the cost. The degrees back then, it was being quoted like 75,000 or 60,000 or something in that range, slightly under 100,000. That's way out of my, I didn't have, my parents never really put aside money for my education. Not a bunch or anything like that. So I really had to, work to pay for my college classes at the same time, ended up doing community college classes and then, transferring my 2-year degree into a 4-year program. So yeah, I basically did, pivoting from technical management after that to adult learning design theory fundamentals, which is instructional design technology or learning design, essentially. Anyways, some poets actually have full-fledged apps out there around their poetry book. I think the one that always caught my eye, most of you know this poet, Courtney Peppernell. It looks like, if you look at the apps, right, you can see which companies helped develop it or were behind it and maybe reach out to them if you're interested in developing an app. If you have the money, or a budget or you're interested in doing something like that, I think that's a pretty neat way to share your work or, develop an app around it, So there's one out there for Pillow Thoughts by Glowwave, on Courtney Peppernell's poetry book, Pillow Thoughts. If you've never seen that, check it out. I think that's pretty neat to have an app for your own work and to share it like that. There's a lot of traffic in the app store, right? For sure. Everyone, a lot of people use apps and things like that. But maintaining apps in the app store, right, it can be costly for sure. I've tried, iOS app and Apple Store fees can be, developer fees are pretty high, and Android fees are less. But, yeah, I haven't really used an Android in quite some time. I've mostly been, I'm sure most of my friends too are all on iOS. So yeah, not to say Android is bad or anything like that. I grew up having a lot of Android phones and things like that. And then, eventually I switched to iOS, but there are no doubt some very cool Android based phones and stuff, I think, the Google Play Store, it's a very, very cool, that, we have app stores in existence, right? And you can make apps. So yeah, there are some pretty neat, again, poetry apps I mentioned, or, book app type, like this. So that's a way to sort of market your work or create something different to make it stand out, a mobile app around it, pretty cool. And you don't necessarily need to hire a developer. There are a lot of ways to build your own apps today, but I think if you're looking for something really, something similar to that, I think you would have to, maybe work with some developers or something to really establish something like that. It's hard to build something from scratch in terms of like app development for sure. But number 9, I have Wear Your Poetry. So, there are a lot of cool print-on-demand services out there, POD places. You can, try, I've tried Amazon Merch, Sellfy or Selfie, Sellfy, Redbubble, Redbubble, Printify, Printful, and Social Print Studio. My faves probably over the years were Redbubble. The quality of Redbubble stickers, has been the best by far out of all of those, I would say. Just like I feel like their stickers are more durable. And I've also tried, Fourth Wall and a few other places. But yeah, so Redbubble, Social Print Studio. I'll put links to some of these, my faves, not all of them, but, Social Print Studio was one I used for sure over the years. I had, a lot of my cartoon drawings put on, buttons and even like a wood, a wood-based design. I had done this drawing of like a matrix. I called it a matrix sunflower. And I, did a mirror design with, butterflies on both ends of a pod and, a sunflower opening up several years ago back when I was drawing a lot more and doing sketch art, and cutting out my sketch art to do different designs on wood backgrounds. Usually it was just like my desk or a small wooden, section or wherever I could find wood, like a wood background. So Yeah, and that was cool. Social Print Studio was really awesome. They did, I had magnets done and some buttons and things. But Redbubble was always like my go-to for stickers. And I have, Amazon merch up of my old drawings, and, the Tiny Koala Duo company's technically still around. A lot of the merch tied to that, my first ever drawing company per se. I never really sold a bunch of my cartoon drawings and stuff like that. Occasionally, I would, sell stickers, to others and gift those out to friends and coworkers and stuff. And yeah, so yeah. Um, and yeah, so those stickers were really cool, to have on laptops and stuff. But I've seen a lot of poets create some, stickers around their poetry, some caps even. Yeah, so you could create your own, merch around your poetry collections and books, and you could put your quotes on T-shirts, or your own poetry lines and things like that. That's pretty neat, yeah. Redbubble has always had pretty good quality overall, I'd say. I'm not a huge fan of Printify and Printful. The thing about some of those platforms, not just them, but there are ones out there, right, where, when someone orders something, they charge your card, or they, to cover any additional expenses or shipping and things like that they're doing, facilitating it, the order for you. And I think that is, it's tough, right? If you don't want that to happen. I've had some friends in the community be like, I don't really like this platform. It's like they keep charging me every time there's an order, putting on my card until it's like fulfilled on their end. And that's kind of messed up. I like Redbubble where, you don't see anything like that, right? But, you get less, you don't get a whole lot. You have to really get a lot of sales, right, for you to see, anything, back from that, right? And yeah, but still, you can do a lot with POD systems. Selfie wasn't too bad, of digital products and stuff. But yeah, I stopped using them because they had the monthly like $20 a month fee or something. Some platforms have monthly fees. I don't like those. I like the free ones. Like Forfall is pretty cool. Yeah, Redbubble, Social Print Studio. Social Print Studio doesn't do shipping and delivery for you. You have to typically order, that, and then do that yourself, Um, yeah, and then so check those out. I see a lot of others have used, Jukebox Print, based out of Canada. I think their sticker quality is very good too. I would say it's very, very good. And some of their other print quality products and stuff too. It's nice to offer, prints and stickers to accompany your poetry collection, some additional merch, I think it's a good, I've seen poets do bookmarks and things like that. And yeah, others totally do grab those, while they're, maybe shopping on your website or, your author page. So it's good to have, you could call them little knickknack gifts, little gifts that others get alongside of your collection or you package with it. So yeah. What else? Let's see. Yeah, so there are some poets I know who leverage platforms like Etsy, right? Some in the community totally have seen success with just selling their poetry collections solely off of Etsy and not through, some of the other distribution channels. So you have to see what works for you, I know poets who do digital versions of their work and print. So if you're going to do something digitally, it might be a good idea, and there's a lot of illustration work in it, or you don't want others lifting it off easily. It's a good idea to have some sort of watermark inside the interior. Of course, it can, disrupt the, image or illustration, right, and work in it. But I think, yeah. But yeah, I've seen, some poets, seen quite a bit of success through Etsy. Again, the thing about Etsy and some platforms, right, you don't own that space, right? You're on their platform, right? So some places, have gotten, shut down out of the blue or things like that, or for violations, So you want to be very careful about, that you're following their terms of service and everything, and be very careful about that because, you can lose all of that traffic that you generate and things like that from your shop. But for the most part, I know a lot of artists who've been on Etsy long term and haven't run into a lot of issues, but they do come up from time to time. Shops get closed, shut down. I think it's really cool that Etsy shows, X amount of people have this in their cart, and their cart. And I think it's cool, there are a lot of poets who, share their, releases through their Etsy, and they give off signed copies through Etsy, for additional price. And yeah, so there's so many platforms out today in existence. I obviously haven't covered all of them, right? For t-shirts and things like that, print on demand services. So you got to see what works for you, I think it's always a good idea to offer your work in multiple formats again. And number 10, so book bundles and giveaways. So I haven't done a giveaway myself, but I have won actually, a few giveaways over the years, book giveaways. The first ever book giveaway I ever won was several years back in Minnesota, sometime between, I think, 2014 and 2017. I won a book giveaway. It was very cool. It was from, I think, the author, her name's probably changed now. I can't remember. Was it Gretchen Powell? I think it was Gretchen Powell. I just entered a giveaway online, commenting with my favorite. I think I commented my favorite books or something that entered you in a giveaway off her website or something. And I ended up winning, and that was pretty cool. And then I won a giveaway, on Instagram too, of Sonia Ringo's book, and too, that was pretty cool as well. That one was just like an Instagram comment entry thing. I'm sure you've all guys have seen that, but there are a lot of cool giveaways actually on Instagram. You can enter just by commenting, following, liking, and resharing in your story. And so I think that's pretty awesome. I didn't expect to win. Where the Beetle went for lunch, that was by Sonia Ringo. So that collection is very awesome, by the way. You should check it out. And she also has a Substack and another collection. Check out her work. So it was definitely one of my favorite poetry collections. Very, very cool. I think she's working on another book. I could be wrong, but yeah, she's also the author of Mortal Atlas. And I've read poetry on the podcast of hers, of Hummingbird Blink, when it started out too. After that, shortly after that giveaway, which was very cool too. So, to learn more about poets, to connect with them. And yeah, so giveaways are a great way to, come into contact with more poets' work, and, to form connections with more writers, on your accounts and things like that. When they enter your giveaway, and some end up winning, and then it gets in their hands, right, and they can share with their friends and others, and it's like a whole chain again. So I haven't done, a giveaway myself yet, but I was thinking about doing a giveaway for, Dippity or Dippity Press or something, just like giving away a bundle of or chapbooks or something. I'm not sure yet. We'll see. Or a Dippity themed merch, like a giveaway that others can enter. So usually, for those giveaways, again, you just like set it up where others, have to follow you to enter, like the post, share it in your story, tag you, typical. And then I've seen some use Rafflecopter or some other, ones to choose, winners, right? To like the spinning circle. Almost looks like Wheel of Fortune, but a little spinner that, the names are, pulled from, and, randomizes the winner. So yeah. Anyways, I haven't tried Patreon a bunch, haven't had much luck with that, but, platforms like that, Buy Me a Coffee ones, Patreon, right? Those are other ways to create some of those have like ways you can have merch and products set up, right, in a shop that others can grab. Like, I think there were mugs and stuff back when I was on there a long time ago, but I'm not sure what it looks like now. I have to check it out again. But yeah, giveaways are another way you can market your work, holding a giveaway now and then. I've even seen some poets do, a bundle giveaway, or some poets do, a giveaway with friends, multiple authors in the community who are in the same location as them, or area. And yeah, and they put it in a basket, like you get, 3 poetry collections from 3 different authors. Follow these instructions to enter, follow us, like the post, tag us in it, and we'll add your name to the list we draw from, at random, and yeah, so you can team up with other authors in the community or others in your area, perhaps, through social media. And that's another way to market your work or get it out there a little bit, yeah, giveaways are fun. Usually quite a few enter, Number 11, in-person pop-up events. So aside from social media, and, there are a lot of cool poetry club reading events, across the world, and across the states, yeah, I haven't attended any in Nevada thus far, but there are definitely some very cool ones out there. And yeah, even back in my home state and stuff, I've looked up, open mic events, and I've heard about others, I've seen in other stories, in other countries, some really cool poetry reading clubs, open mic events. So just, doing those, you can connect with others, share your work, get it out there. We even have poets, who have submitted to Dipti, right, who have, shared their work at open mic events or reading events in their, where they live. So that's a lot of fun, So who knows, maybe one day I will get a chance to do one of those. But yeah, there are local radio stations I know poets have, participated on, and talked about their poetry collections and books. Even lives, Instagram lives, little mini chats with some other accounts on social media. There are some poets in the community or writers or others who just like, chatting with authors and sharing their work too, And we sort of did that a little bit on Hummingbird Blink, the podcast show. I would typically add commentary around, poets, readings and work, and give my thoughts and insights and stuff, a little bit more commentary on it. And yeah, that was fun back then. I sort of stopped doing that because I want to just hear other poets' voices rather than my own on every episode. So yeah. And number 12, so formats, digitalization, audios. So again, I mentioned this earlier, offer your book and work in different formats, right? When it's available in multiple places for others to grab, right, that's increases your chances of it being discovered, right? Because not everyone likes reading in print, not everyone likes reading solely digitally, and some do like audiobooks, right? Or, doing that. So, the first place I ever published my book, was lulu.com, or my work, Salty Cartoons I Draw. I had some, just some of my first ever drawings, Sharpie marker and stuff in self-published collections. That was not under my pen name, though. That was under my actual full name. And then, I tried, Smashwords, doing ebooks, and random collections I would publish from my middle school and high school days if I shared. But yeah, I have an old Kindle Fire reader, and I have used, in the past mobile and desktop versions of that. And yeah, I think, a lot of others still prefer print versions, and editions. But there are totally some people who love ebooks, right? Saving bookcase shelf space, right? And things like that. Today there's Audible, right? An Amazon company, which is like ACX, I think, and Audiobook Creation Exchange, ACX, and then Findaway Voices, another one which I came across through Smashwords, and now Smashwords, right, is part of Draft to Digital, right? So yeah. But anyways, there are a lot of different audiobook creation services out there. Those are just some I'm aware of, ACX, the one through Amazon, and yeah, Findaway Voices. I'm not sure if they're still around, Findaway Voices, but yeah. You can do audiobooks, distribute those to, streaming services too, or some poets create their own albums around their work too. I know R.K. Gandhi has done that. And several other poets I know are working on audiobooks. I think Sonia Ringo is also doing audiobook. And I saw that, I think, in her Substack. So it's a great way to, share your work, through an audiobook version, having multiple formats of it, you can work with maybe a musician or artist to add some music to, if you're doing like an album release or something like that, too, yeah, so you have a lot of options to share your work, in audio formats today, thanks to technology, right? And you don't actually have to use your voice, right? There are services where you can have someone else read it if you're not a huge fan of your own voice, right? But yeah, you totally could do it yourself, all yourself, an audiobook, you don't necessarily need others involved in that, but a lot of great platforms and ways to go there. So spoken word reels and posts on Instagram, TikTok, right? A lot of poets do that to share their work, right? They hold up their work, just start doing reads from it every day. A little bit samplers, and again, the algorithm, everyone sees different results there. So yeah, there, in the first few seconds of your reel, that's when they say it's like you have to grab others' attention, right? You have to create some sort of hook or catch, right, for others to like be directed towards it. But yeah, number 13, join more online communities, right? I mentioned back in the old days, I joined, Figment, prior to that Inkpop. And, it's a great way, joining online communities. There's still some really great ones for poetry writing out there where you can post your work, share things, and network further. I think that really helped me. I also tried, I forgot to mention, I think I mentioned, Teen Ink too, back in the days too. Teen Ink was something I was on in the several years ago when I was younger. Yeah, or not several years ago, but way back in my middle school and high school days. Middle school predominantly, I think, and yeah, a bit into ninth grade. And Wattpad, I mentioned Wattpad. So yeah, when you post your work or samples of it, previews, there's some spaces where you can totally do that. And yeah. Most of you are aware of Chill Subs, so, they have a cool directory, not only for submission opportunities, but where you can find writers and artists. So I think it's worth it to create a Chill Subs profile. You can do links out to your work. They do have, free caps, I think, on that, for how many you can link off, and things like that. But still a great way for others to find you and search results and stuff. Yeah. They have a new writer profile look stuff, so the one I have screenshotted in there is different from what's now. They've added quite a bit to the writer profiles and being able to add links to your work and book publications and more, projects you do. Number 14, you can hire someone, right? There are others who can help, with establishing a marketing plan, printing materials for your work and stuff, right? Reedsy, 99 Designs, Fiverr, Upwork, and Design Crowd. In the past, I was a designer on some of those platforms briefly, competing in some of the design contests and stuff. I never won, but I got close to some in the past, And sometimes in those contests, you get some feedback. They're like, we don't like this, or they don't say it exactly like this, or, I've gotten some rude comments now and then on things like that, and you're just like trying to enter the design contest and stuff, but it happens, not everyone's going to like your work or submission entry for those design contests, right, on those platforms, but it was still a great learning experience, I think I only ever got really close to getting to the final round on the book cover design ones, yeah, but those were always fun, I felt like it was a good way to, challenge yourself design wise, to enter those and stuff, so yeah, I haven't, used Reedsy heavily myself, but some fellow authors totally, I've mentioned in the past, have used Reedsy's discovery features, like they have reviews and, upvotes functionality there, you can get, it's a way to sort of get, feedback on your work from, others too. And they have a lot of other things on Reedsy, Reedsy, so check it out. I think they also have writing contests out there and some neat stuff too, yeah. Number 15, we have hit number 15. Okay, so make a digital billboard ad. So I totally have done this. I always wondered what it'd be like to have a billboard ad. So I did this experiment. I was just like, why not? I designed a billboard, and I remember it was through Blip Billboards in the US, I did it for a few days. I reserved a digital billboard. It was a few weeks before Christmas, right? and it cost me, under $100. I remember it was like somewhere around 100 or $75, and it wasn't too bad. That's not too much, actually. It's a fairly reasonable, considering how long it was ran for, and you can choose the locations where it's going to be. I think they don't allow, personal ads, so it has to be, a business focused ads, right? You have to establish it as a brand, right? Things like that. So yeah, so it can't be it can't be a personal ad. And you can have, they have services where you could have someone design the ad for you, but that's costly. So it's not too bad to design a billboard ad yourself. It really doesn't take much. You could use something like, I mentioned I don't use Adobe Suite products. I don't. But you could use Canva and design it in there, or something else, tons of design applications out there. So that was pretty cool. I ran it, and I didn't get to see it in person, but there's some cities, right, New York and Nevada, right, with more billboards or higher, prices attached to them, in terms of that, I think, if I recall. And anyways, it was cool to do the billboards. And I know some people take pictures and photos with them, and totally you could do that, if you catch it, being on the billboard at the time running your ad and stuff. I think there's one out there I've seen on Instagram or display in places. I don't know how, if it's good or not. I haven't looked at it, but I think it's called Cassie.io or something. I'm not sure what that entails. I think, so there are ones similar to Blip billboards out there. I don't know if Blip is still around, Blip billboards. But I'm sure other ones exist now, because that was several years back when I tried that, a couple years back, Blip billboards. And so I think the good thing about those billboard platforms nowadays, you can, have a fixed budget and not go over that. And that's pretty neat, to get an ad out there billboard wise. And, you don't, you can do it you can have it in multiple locations. I think that's very cool. So, I'm sure other countries, have something similar to that. I'm not sure about other ones that exist out there, but I'm sure if you do some digging and searching, you'll find some similar alternatives to that, where you're located. And number 16, so, I mentioned over 15 ways in the article I typed up. Subscriptions and newsletters, right? So I think it's very valuable to establish an email list of readers and supporters who follow you closely. Let's say, you're on social media, your account gets taken down or something happens there, right? You have at least your email subscriber list there. You can communicate and build that out again, and still share through your newsletter, blog, and, post and things like that, right? A lot of writers today have Substacks, Medium, several platforms exist. Beehive, I know quite a few artists have, Beehive newsletters and stuff. And I think the look of Beehive is actually very, very cool. I don't know. I was thinking about trying, Beehive for my, my personal newsletter. I'm not sure. I do like Substack though, for sure, but there are definitely some other ones out there, besides Substack, that others use. It's not the only one out there, but def very cool. All of the ones in existence, right? So. Yeah, and then at the end of this article, I gave movie recommendations. I won't go over those again, but movies I was watching back then at the time I was doing this article. So, so those are just ways to market your work. I just covered them, the best I could. You can do a lot, you can be very creative nowadays, again, thanks to technology, as I've said multiple times. You can make a YouTube channel even around your poetry collection or all of your work, start doing reads, do shorts, I've seen recently others said they've seen quite a bit of, varied success with, shorts, reading and sharing, So, sometimes it's, again, hit or miss. Sometimes you have reels or shorts that do better than others. And I think once you find a format that works for you, post-wise, stick with it. Consistency is important, whatever you do marketing-wise, and sharing. So, yeah. But marketing overall can be very costly. It can take a lot out of your pocket. Sometimes, poets never see a return back on all of their marketing efforts and their publication, if you're self-publishing, maybe it wasn't a lot of out of pocket to really create that, especially if you designed your own book cover, if you were your own editor, had friends edit your work instead, or things like that, you could do that. I personally, try to do everything myself, in terms of my own self-published works. Yeah, I think it's you can save a lot of money that way doing it all yourself, but it's totally awesome sometimes to have your manuscript or book or something, accepted by a publishing house or, a press, out there in the community. And, some places do give you royalties. Some just offer, in the form of payment copies, right, as payment instead, which, we do at Deputy Press, right, offering copies in the form of payment for, Deputy Press. And yeah, I would totally prefer, again, to pay writers for the work, do advances and stuff like that, but we can't do that. And a lot of places, I feel like, throughout time, right, they go under because they can't, meet royalties, or they get lawsuits, right? So it's something you have to keep in mind and be careful about, again. Yeah, as I've mentioned on this podcast. But yeah, anyways, marketing, a lot of presses and lit magazine journals do offer marketing services on their website. If you look, and dig in their site. Not all places. So I think one place, I was just thinking back, I think, was it Rumpus Room? Was that it? No. There was Rumpus. I think they had advertising. Yes, Rumpus. Yes, the Rumpus. So that was it. The Rumpus. They do have an advertised section, I recall. The Rumpus was founded in 2009. They are definitely one of the longest running online independent literary magazines, in existence. So they have, they do advertising, right? And that also helps them, keep their, website up and running, doing ads, at a cost, right? For others, I'm not really sure how much it is anymore, but, to find out their rates, right, they have usually contact addresses, right, and a lot of literary magazines and journals do, so you can, of course, reach out to places and find out what the rates are and see something. I've seen some lit magazine journals have some very, very friendly costs for online ads, and things like that, especially. There was one place, I can't remember what it was. I think it was an environmental impact type literary magazine or journal. I can't remember what they were called. But yeah, they had like something between $20 and $50 for an online ad or something for X amount of days or weeks or months. I can't remember, but it was fairly reasonable. So yeah. You just want to, check out what's out there, if you do digging or you come across, lit magazine journals with those additional advertising services, and, let's say they have accepted your work, let's say a poem or something, and they're also doing advertising, right? Oftentimes you can, also get in the issue and do another ad in there or something at a very reasonable rate. Not always, sometimes it's fixed, but yeah, so many ways to market your work, to get it out there as a poet, beyond literary magazines and journals, beyond getting published through them. On top of that, there are things you can do yourself to market your work further. I would say just be very careful about, scams, con artists, things like that. There have been several times I've come across people pretending to be others. There are things like that. Others trying to do very fishy things, or, it's it can be pretty dangerous out there. Others trying to steal your information, money, and things like that. So I think it's best to do everything yourself, really, marketing wise, and, to start from there and see what works for you, try different platforms, things like that. And it's, so you have to see what works, and it's totally okay to like do some, giveaway events, to maybe work with some close friends in the community you have, to do giveaway events and stuff combined, and rally together and stuff. I think that's really nice. So yeah, you just want to be careful out there, because time and time again, I've seen cases of a lot of scams and things like that. So yeah, marketing can be expensive, right? You have to set aside some money for that, if you really are focused on getting your work out there into the hands of more readers and stuff. But something you can do in marketing, some poets just like, share other poems, not necessarily from their book, but, sometimes they do samplers, and then they do alternate between samples and then other posts, right? And stuff like that, to sort of try to grow and expand their reach, of others seeing their books and other posts, right? So yeah, so many ways I could go on, but these are just some of the main ways. Again, I totally can link this old article I have. Some things have changed, screenshot wise, right? Because websites update, like chill subs and stuff. So just keep that in mind. But I can link the old article I typed out, if you prefer having something to reference back to. Yeah, totally. We'll do that in the description and stuff. So take care, guys. Again, I hope this episode helped you. I'm not a marketing wizard or anything like that. I'm not like a marketing guru. I've had mostly, I think, some very unsuccessful marketing attempts, but I think it's cool to share, what worked and didn't work for you, so others can learn from that or see what, that, again, in print ads, I would say, are very, very costly sometimes, but, could be totally worth it. It depends, again, on like the lit mag or journal, I guess, and their reach and circulation. But online ads, there are quite a few that are, quite budget friendly, not always. Some of the bigger platforms or spaces at sites like poets.org and Poets and Writers, they can be quite costly, I'd say. Just because, they have a lot of subscribers, on their mailing list, a lot of site traffic, right? They base it on that. So, yeah. And you won't necessarily see sales always from, what you use to market your work, right? So, again, it's going to be hit or miss. Some things are going to be unsuccessful and some things are marketing wise, right? And it's a lot of numbers, right? And things like that, right? On social media, we constantly see our, audience reach and things like that. And I try not to pay attention to a whole lot of that. If you focus on that constantly, right, you're going to really just like, it's going to, for some poets and writers, have talked to me, they told me they were overwhelmed by social media and were like, I like what you're doing, with your work. You're just like posting because you love to do it, right? And you just want to share, you're not really concerned about, the numbers, or you're not really worried a whole lot about what others think about you. And they mentioned they were trying to constantly post things that others would like versus what they actually like, So I think you have to really focus on that, if you want to share your book, if you want to share your work, go for it, Share it the way you want to. And it may not necessarily get 1,000 views, 2,000 or 25,000 views, but, you have to be happy with how you're posting content and your work out there. Don't feel like you have to follow the leader, follow others, right, out there. Obviously, there are, perhaps there are some things that work better, format-wise on platforms like Instagram and TikTok and stuff, but social media is, it's bizarre, some things that, get more reach than others, One day I posted just like a video of me just like holding my phone, showing palm trees, with one of my favorite Bollywood songs. And I was just like, wow, this got what, was it? I think it got like 7,000 something. Let me see. I think I still have it pinned because that was the weirdest reel I ever had that, I was like, what? Yeah, so it's up to almost 8,000 views, guys. We're just showing trees with a song. That just goes to show you never know what's going to be hit or miss on social media. And yeah, it's just me showing the sky and some palm trees. And it was one of my favorite Bollywood songs, one I listened to when I was, it was sort of a romantic Bollywood song, I guess, and it was on one of my drawing accounts. But anyways, I didn't really understand why that post did better than others, and I tried to do similar reels like that. And it was like, it never really, nothing beyond that. So, the time of day you post, everything, there's various factors and stuff, right? Everything, I don't know. Social media, it's very complicated, but I do the best I can, I have worked with tons of social media accounts, over the years and managing that myself and, done different formats, tried different things, experimentation. And the algorithm is bizarre, guys. That's all I'm going to say. It's very hard to market your work as an artist nowadays. I know fellow artists, even musicians, they are really trying, but there's that whole thing about called shadow banning. I don't know. Is that like, I don't know. There's so many terms for that stuff. Some accounts have totally tanked and struggled to get their reach back, but it's possible, right, to get out of that. I think it's tough, you just got to keep trying, and see what works for you and what doesn't, and go from there, and keep moving forward. So that's a quote, I think, from Disney's Meet the Robinsons, right? That I always love that quote, keep moving forwards, and I used to have that actually pinned back when I was working in IT support in the early days, 2014-ish and onwards, in my little Microsoft link back when that existed, right? And the pop-up pin to keep moving forwards, to remind myself, no matter how hard things get, keep moving forwards, that I always tried to put a little motivational message in my back then, and things like that around me to keep going. So it can be hard, we all have tough days. Marketing can take a toll on us, right? Social media managers stuff, their jobs are actually very stressful, right? Some of them have to, if they're not showing growth or improvement on the accounts they're working with, right, they can lose their job, right? Things like that. And but I think it's tough, so marketing is I think something that is hard for a lot of artists, writers, author, everyone, no matter what you're doing. It's businesses in general, it's tough, and sometimes I know some poets I feel so awkward reading my poetry collection out loud and stuff, but it's scary to do that the first time, to read anything on social media, or even whether it be audio only or video only. It's still kind of, once you do it, again, I mentioned rip the Band-Aid off and get it rolling, it's not too bad. Be careful again, you can make your, account private if you want to or not. But, if you're trying to market your work, it's best to have public accounts, right? For others to discover and find you. So, that's all, just wanted to share this. I hope it helps, again, I haven't had tons of success marketing my work, but just sharing, things that I've noticed in terms of, platforms and services, and, things that, different methods you can try, at least, and see what works for you. I didn't really have a large budget to work with. I went through a budget I had really you can lose your budget fairly quickly with marketing, just like that, right? So, you have to allocate it out. You have to plan it. It's tough, P.S. guys, just want to tack this on. And so CLMP, right, the Community of Literary Magazines and Presses, right, I've seen from time to time, in the community channels, right, that, if you're part of their membership, right, that others inform you of ad spaces, too, that way, too, that they have, and things like that. So there are also, again, a lot of events that you could attend, locally first, and things like that, to network with others and stuff like that. There are probably some virtual meetups and stuff too in the community that you could attend as well, if you don't want to necessarily travel to a bunch of places. But it totally helps. I see a lot of poets, they hop on lives with others, on Instagram. They do things like that. Again, joint posts, things like that, sharing, and a lot of different ways you can do it again. And in terms of upcoming episodes, I just want to give a little note here. So again, I just do these when I can. So, there might be a break here while I, work on other things, again, I'm hoping to do a expanded series of this. To spotlight a few different things in the lit mag world and community, because I think it's pretty interesting and fascinating, when you think about it, all of these lit mags and journals in existence, and the different focuses they have and everything. So, so I'll give you guys maybe time to catch up to some of the episodes and stuff, the audio ones you can listen through the series. It looks like I'm on episode number 32 thus far. So I hope it helps, me sharing my thoughts with you. If, it does, feel free to drop a comment sometime, and totally I probably will see it, or try to at least, wherever you may be listening to this on, I tried to plug it into as many channels as possible, for others to hear these episodes, so I hope it helps at least someone, out there. So, yeah, take care and have awesome days ahead, and yeah.